Thank you once again for attending. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kweku Ejapong, and I shall be the MC for this program this evening. Let us zoom straight into business, since time is, I would not say far spent, but a bit spent as opposed to what we originally intended. Ladies and gentlemen, shall we welcome the moderator, Mr. Ivor Ajimandria, to take the seats with a round of applause. So this is not to make Mr. Ajimandria's head swell, but we have to remind ourselves of the colossus before us this day. He has worked in the fields of international development, cooperation, and diplomacy for years, and previously served as a special assistant to former President John Agyekum Kufuor on development, cooperation, and of whom he has written 2 biographies, Between Faith and History and The Art and Power of Goodness, forwarded by former UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown. He has been a historian of the Bank of Ghana and recently had launched Central Banking in Ghana and the Governors, Institutional Growth and Economic Development. This is aside other published works on Ghana and Africa. In the fields of arts and culture, he has worked as an associate of the Nigerian Nobel laureates in literature, Wole Soyinka, over the years, and written and edited 2 works on him, Crucible of the Ages and May Their Shadows Never Sink. Wow, I never knew he had a hand in that. Mr. Ajimandria has held research and visiting scholar fellowships at University of Oxford, Harvard, University of Johannesburg, and holds graduate degrees from the London School of Economics and the School of Oriental and African Studies, London, popularly known as SOAS, and the University of Wales. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an understatement to say he is an all-rounder. Let us hear it once again for Mr. Ajimandria. So Mr. Ajimandria will be the moderator for our discussions with the esteemed Professor Owusu Ansah. Before I move on and read the profile of Prof, I would like to invite Prof to come and take the seats on the stage. Thank you very, very much. I'm sure if we were to read Prof's full profile, it would replace the whole session. So let us just get an abridged version of what Prof has done. He teaches African history at James Madison University in the United States. He holds a PhD in history from Northwestern University in America, a master's degree in Islamic studies from McGill University in Canada, and a bachelor's degree with honors in comparative religions and education from the University of Cape Coast in Ghana. A former fellow of the Harry S. Truman Institute for International Peace as the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel, Dr. Owusu Ansah has taught at the university level in full faculty position since 1985. How many of us were born then? I'm sure a couple of us were born, and some were children. In addition to developing and teaching broad range of courses in African history, world civilizations, and historical methods, he has also served in several important administrative roles, from being the founding director of Africana Studies Minor at his institution, to serving a 5-year term as international president of the Ghana Studies Council, now the Ghana Studies Association. In 2007, Dr. Owusu Ansah was appointed as one of 2 special assistants to the President for Diversity at James Madison University. He later transitioned to become the Executive Director for Faculty Access and Inclusion, the inaugural Associate Provost for Diversity, that is between 2018 and 2022, and now the Executive Director for Access and Educational Outreach. Prof. Owusu Ansah created the James Madison University Summer Ghana Study Abroad and Internship Program, and for the past 26 years, facilitated the program in partnership with Ghanaian colleagues in the areas of research and scholarship. Dr. Owusu-Ansah is known for his work on Islam in Ghana and West Africa. In addition to the many published articles, his talismanic traditions in the 19th century Asante and the co-authored Islamic Learning, the States and the Challenges of Education in Ghana, which he co-authored in 2013 with Marxey and Abdullahi Idrisu, are well cited. In addition to these, Prof. David Owusu-Ansah is the author of the much-acclaimed editions of the Historical Dictionary of Ghana. The 5th edition is forthcoming. We are looking forward to that. Co-authored work with Professor Edmond Abaka from the University of Miami. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just end here. Professor David Owusu-Ansah. Thank you very, very much for accepting to grace this occasion. So over to you, Mr. Moderator.
Good evening. I will first like to thank the Institute of International Affairs here in Accra for asking me to be the moderator of this program. And I think it's because I've known Professor Owusu-Ansah for many years. This is the second time I've been asked to talk to him in public or on stage. The first one was when Professor Edubuahin died. And GBC invited me to talk to him and another distinguished Nigerian historian, Professor Toyin Falola, to reflect on the times of Professor Edubuahin. So welcome. I don't know whether I should welcome you to Accra, Ghana, or I should welcome you to this program. But whichever way it is, welcome to this evening's program.
Thank you very much, Ava. And as Ava mentions, we've known each other for a long time. In fact, Ava's father, in the very early 1980s, had worked with my dissertation advisor, Professor Ava Walks, from whom there is Ava Ajmendua. And his father actually helped me do my research at the Palace in Kumasi. And we have since been connected. He was in Wales at that time, but through the Ghana Studies Association Council too, we got to know each other, especially for his work on Yas and Toa and the subsequent ones. So I'm glad to be on stage here with Ava. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. We will begin from the beginning. We've been asked to talk about brain drain. You've been away for years. You come and you go. Is it our gain or is it our loss?
Well, when you talk of brain drain, it's a phenomenon actually that has been around, especially in the early 1960s when colonial rules around the globe started coming to an end. During that time, you have individuals who have been trained locally. Some have studied at Fura Bay in the case of Ghana, that is the Gold Coast. Some came back. Certainly for the professionals, do leave to go to more advanced societies. You know the literature, Walter Rodney, the historian on slavery, talked about slavery as certainly a labor drain on Africa and contributing to the underdevelopment of the continent. But we should also look at that particular historical development as loss of skills that actually went into develop the nation of the development of the North and the poverty of the South. Of the development of the North and the poverty of the South. So you have the North-South divide emerging out of that. One can say that brain drain is a voluntary, in many cases, decision. It's not makes better for a number of reasons. The environment within which they live even when it is not well developed and has all the challenges, and we all understand challenges, people may not move. They may have family relations that makes it difficult for them to move. They may have traditional obligations that makes it difficult for them to move. So when you talk to me, when Professor Eduboahin passed away, and you asked me the first question, well, now that the prof has passed away, why are you not coming back so that you can fill the history places? And I told you a story that I came back after doing the research for my PhD. I had a letter in hand of appointment at the University of Science and Technology in the Humanities Development Department. I came back, the universities have been closed because students have gone on strike and the government of the day had closed the institutions. I went to the registrar's office with a letter in hand, and I was told point blank that the university had been closed, and the dean, Kwame Napo, who signed it, is in Nigeria, so they were not going to honor it. So I finished my research and writings, and I went back, and that's when I got the offer in Jerusalem. And I went to Jerusalem. And then, of course, a year after Jerusalem, I got a call back to America to fill in a role. And the following year, I got this particular position at my current university, where I have been for 37 years. You know, and if I came back here, I would have been here for 38 years or something like that. So that's part of the situation. But I will mention that every decade and every 5 years, what is happening in a given society determines whether people stay or people leave. So that part, but you say, is that brain loss? I think it's, you know, when I'm thinking of it, I feel like I have to respect the people who stayed behind and doing the work that we all should be doing. And therefore, when you look at the 1970s, when we were finishing university, majority of my classmates were going to go to Nigeria because the oil boom had come in Nigeria, and then teachers were being attracted to Nigeria, and teachers are also part of the brains that the nation had actually produced, whether it is at the elementary school level or the secondary school level or the university level. And a lot of people left. That was also the period that I finished, did my national service before I got scholarship to study in Canada. And get to Canada 2 years for a long period to do PhD, and your scholarship is canceled by the same persons that sent you overseas. And you're sitting there trying to figure out how you finish your program. So other scholarships came, and then I continued for the PhD. So that's the story. In the process, however, we have not lost any great brain in me. No, I'll say that I have worked hard, and I think that being overseas, in my resume that you went through, I have also impacted a number of students when there was no Africana Studies program in place. We created some for my university, and now my colleagues who continued in that role, we have come to a point where it was a center, now it's an institute. So African students from all over are coming to that place, and so the efforts that we are making continue to impact students across the globe, and we have tried to make sure that we keep coming back so that we can also build networks.
Well, those who went, I mean, Ghanaians, Africans who went to the Americas, to Europe in the 1950s, went there to study. They came back. Some of them became anti-colonial leaders. Some of them were understudying the colonial institutions in preparation for taking over some time. That is when they were gone. It looks like it wasn't a fashionable thing to say of brain drain, because everything was about gaining and coming back. The brain drain concept, which developed into a practical situation, was in the 1970s and 80s. And there are some political, most likely economic dimensions to this. We're talking of people leaving, because of instability here and there. And there was also the economic underlying of whatever was happening that would make people go. Was that what you meant by Nigeria, people going to Nigeria, people going to Europe to teach and things like that?
Yes, but more expanded upon. You know, when we get trained overseas, we adult positively compared to that. You understand that's something that you have to work towards improving. The middle class doesn't feel safe, school fees and other things, so that has a much more direct impact. And somebody sitting overseas will say, I'd rather impact my extended family than to go work in a way, a place where I'm not safe. So that is one factor, but it is not the only factor. Before I came, I did some readings on the subject. I just don't get up and come and talk the same way I don't just get and talk to my class. I prepare. And I was reading a piece on South Korea. It's a 1992 reversing, making it intentional, making it intentional a policy. Whereas the local scholars as well, so that there's the level of jealousy and disagreement is reduced. And this is what the government was doing and putting it in the private sector, so that that actually generates public-private development in the long term. And everybody knows, if you're looking at South Korea in the 70s and where they are now, definitely they did something right. And just in terms of the remittances thing, Singapore gets 0 remittances. What's the point? It's not that they don't need the money, but everyone is almost in there generating capital.
Okay. In terms of transnational remittance, as you're talking about, compared to the transfer of skills back to base, that is where these diaspora would have been. In the case of, and also in academia, about what some time ago, a third of the business professors at MIT were Indians. So when the Indian Institute of Technology was set up, they will go back to India during summer and then will offer courses. So virtually offer courses. So virtually, so the skills coming back or the money coming back.
This is what the research actually talks about, brain circulation. That's how they define it. And Prof is here, Prof. Amuzu is here. When we do come, the summer program, our summer program is situated and hosted at the Language Center, where Prof is the director.
I'm not saying you should, all of you should come by all means. I'm just...
No, but let me address the issue. And I cited Kofi Bako's link to really defining a step beyond Walter Rodney and look at North-South relation. That's something I learned for the first time this summer. So you have to come more and more and more. We always know that we know, but we don't make in America, you see, and then that works. But look at Emmanuel Echampong, my colleague at Harvard. Emmanuel Echampong, as the director for the African Studies Center, developed very good relations not only with the history department here, Emmanuel is a Dubois student, but also with the university. And when the university is celebrating its 75th anniversary, Emmanuel came to join the vice chancellor, and they did a host for the Zoom Lion sponsored public health lecture. And at that particular space, he talked about the many PhD students from University of Ghana who he brings to Harvard to do research and train them halfway, and then they come here to finish. So people meet in Tripoli, Libya. That was before everything fell apart in Libya. They had a meeting there, and the title of the meeting was very nice: Managing Brain Drain and Working with the Diaspora. Because they have actually come to the understanding that you cannot force people to come back. That's something that can be developed. And Irene Odote was the director for African Studies Institute. We thought about a system whereby I was actually the president for the association. We were thinking of finding certain areas and courses and needs where in the summer we can advertise in our organization and those who are going to do research in Ghana can participate and help give series of lectures. It never took off. So you have to figure out why it didn't. But I believe that institutions can do that. Currently, the Carnegie Foundation is trying to do something like that, looking for African scholars who may want to spend short term in summer in certain institutions on the continent. And I know colleagues who have done it. You know, Kwamina Pamford has done it twice, once at Cape Coast and once at Legon. And he retired, actually, got back, and he's now the investor of energy, I believe, in Sunyani. So the relationship that we are trying to develop is very critical for national development.
Now, let's get back to your personality. Now that we've descended down to this level, to your personality, to your own writings. Your PhD thesis was very localized. Look at the talismanic traditions in Asante, and others like Emmanuel Echampom, who you mentioned, Irene Odote, and others had been very specific, looking at parts of the country, specifically even ethnic groups, and trying to understand the evolution, be it anthropological, sociological, to come up with studies that will benefit people who are not even from there. So when you teach in America and you teach to African Americans and other white Americans, what is it that you teach them that will make them be more interested in geographic areas they've never known, they've never visited, because your specialization is completely of the environment in which they grew up?
That's a very good question. Why would academic institutions like to create an area of study that is not traditional to them? Traditional would be, in the medieval period, you'd be interested in looking at religion and theology, okay, and philosophy. And you understand when President Kwame Nkrumah established the African Studies Institute, that was to bring Africa and the Gold Coast, then of course Ghana, into focus for study. Professor Nketia and his cohort did music. And then they did African music. And Ghanaians themselves questioned the wisdom of doing African music. What's that? It's not philosophy. So you get Professor Jachi and others writing African philosophy. So you have to be thinking, how do you help your students, whether in Ghana or America, where I am, to think globally, to recognize that what they know is not sufficient, and that what they can learn can actually augment their own personal growth, okay? So when we started the African Studies programs at my school, the program that is a course has been introduced by Professor Dan McFarlane. Professor Dan McFarlane was not an Africanist. He's a white man in old age, and he was interested in North Africa because of his experience. He's actually trained Jeffersonian historian, but he established what he called the West African Experience course, because he has spent a summer at the University of Ghana Institute of African Studies. See the impact, the history that you do. So I will become the first trained Africanist to be hired. And then my department chair sponsored that course that Dr. McFarlane was doing to be moved into the art and art history school. And I created my own African history course. And then we started adding different variations. And then I worked with my colleagues in African American literature and other areas, and gradually we started doing that. And then over time, the pressure actually is coming from the students themselves. Because if you're a faculty trying to create things, you always have to stay within the limits in terms of how many courses you can teach, how many students that will be in that particular course. And over time, though, when you have pressure coming, then other departments are making hires that fit into the larger kind of conversation that you want the university to have. So from history, we got faculty in English who were doing Africa, but many that were doing African American literature. You have somebody in actually anthropology is a very interesting story because they were hiring Latin Americanists. Those days, they come and then they leave. And I went to have a drink with some of my colleagues in anthropology, and I said, if you hired an Africanist, they will stay. And they did, and the person stayed for 2 years and left. That's actually the only one person has left. You have to give a second chance. And they did, and now, it really stayed. Mm-hmm. And so now we have our colleagues who actually led for the establishment of the center. They are fantastic individuals. Mm-hmm. And they have people, when I wrote for a grant from Department of Education looking for a Swahili specialist, we got it. And the grant they gave us is not a grant that we were qualified to write for. But I wrote anyway. It usually went to schools that already have established African studies programs, like Indiana, Northwest, and others. And I made an argument that we want to connect the dots properly. And they gave us money to hire, and then all of a sudden, you bring in people who actually come to enrich the program very much. And once the programs are enriched, and we added the summer program in Ghana, it really became a university-wide and well-known program. And everybody who has come through it, unfortunately, many of them find out in their junior years because they have to do the general education courses. But when the challenge was actually trying to get students to count many of them as minoring in the program, because other minors had a lot of students who were in, and we didn't have that. But our colleagues who have worked in the program now has actually achieved a standard whereby we advertise and have hired a full-time director of the center. Yeah, so.
You've spent many years doing comparative studies on religions, especially Islamic studies, from Kebas right down to Northwestern University, which is one of the best centers for African studies. We're talking of interfaith situations. In the context of this country and in Africa, from the time you started your studies to this time, what do you think has been the evolution of interfaith situations?
Well, this is nothing that I contributed to. There are people who are working in those areas. Your own Archbishop Kwesi Sapong has worked in that area for generations. So it is the progressive church leaders and imams that the credit actually should go to. For those of us in the academy, when I started, I did New Testament Greek, and Professor Gaba directed us very much to studying religion, the philosophy of it, and the thinking that got back to society. So in terms of methodology, they were always encouraging us to be participant observers, which sociology folks probably knew that much better than those of us in religions. And then I have to do electives. And everybody did a certain Christian elective. And, I like my professor, Dr. Awa, so I decided I would do Islam. Yeah, so I did elective in Islam, and I swear that I graduated not having known how to write a single letter of Arabic. Okay? But I got scholarship to go study Islamic studies. And the first 2 years, you have to pass intermediate Arabic. and it is not counted as one of your cost distributions. You have to just, so we just went at it and worked very hard doing it. And the more you study these religions, the more you recognize that the underlying principles are the same. So why actually do you engage in conflict? You know, and as Professor Kwesi Edu, when he was at Ford Foundation and later at Trust Africa, did the conference in 2005, talked about. 2005 was when Christians and Muslims in Nigeria were burning each other's worship places. So Trust Africa brought them to Dakar, and I was fortunate to have been invited to that, to talk about, really to get these two leading individuals identified in Nigeria as the leaders of this conflict, to sit down and to talk. And they recognized that they didn't disagree too much. But the question that somebody raised, which was to get you angry, well, you know, we have alarm watches. So why do you get up in the morning when we are trying to sleep and then go on the loudspeaker box and then call for prayer? Can people actually get up and go to prayer? And then the Muslim says, but you ring the bell. You see, so we are disagreeing over petty issues, which in many cases is ethnic based, economic based. And so what Trust Africa tried to do was to encourage those of us who are attending the conference actually to have a research agenda that can come back to Trust Africa to be shared. So that is when, you know, I have done my previous research on the palace in Kumasi, Muslims at the palace, the charms that they made or the prayers that they made for various Asante rulers from 1777 all the way to current anyway, and how Asante system was able to incorporate them into the palace in Sumankwa, and dividing them to do their own things, but serving a larger purpose. And I felt that the state of Ghana, for example, can also look at these particular religious dichotomies, but also the common interest that it serves. So that's when I started writing on looking at pluralism and the issue of commonality, okay? And you have to have the right leadership very much to make that sustain. The current chief imam has done enormously well for that. And even if you step back into the 70s, into the 80s, the Muslim organizations, the youth organizations were a little bit in conflict, but over time they have very much come into consensus, a high degree of consensus. And so Professor Lamin Sane, who passed away when about 3 or 4 years now, almost 5 years I believe, was trying to move his research to Ghana from Yale and create a center. We came to inaugurate the Sana Institute, and unfortunately he died shortly after. So Reverend Dr. John Azuma is now the director, and I'm happy that he has me as one of his members of the advisory board. So I do come, and the center is a center for the study of Christianity and Islam, very much looking at Muslim-Christian relations. And I think that that is a very, very important center that needs to be supported. And I would like also to mention that there's Pragmura, Johnson Mbila and his group. I think Johnson is now a Christella, a group of Christella, and they also do some Christian interfaith issues. So I think that that is something that the nation should very much encourage and not make it political, because that wouldn't help anybody at all. Yeah.
You have a Christian background. Do you feel trusted by close family people? You work with Malams, you work with here you work with the Nsumankwa people, you work with the chief imams, and then you are everywhere as a mediator of faiths. And is it very easy?
I think it is very easy, honestly. my students occasionally will ask me, are you a Muslim? And I said, no. And they'll say, how come that you know so much about it? I had lunch last week with a very good friend of mine, and she says, she's a Muslim, Hajia. And she says, that's a question that I've always wanted to ask you. Because they were talking to somebody, and John also made the point. And the person is a reverend minister. His name David. Who? Which David? David also. Oh, as for David, he's not a Christian. And I said, what? I know him, he's a Christian. He's almost a Muslim. Okay. And Hajia also told me, her question is, how come that you really like the study of Islam and all that? And I reflected a little bit because I felt that it's a question that is not necessarily a curiosity in terms of why are you studying Islam or have you become involved, and the issues that you're writing about are so pertinent. So is the question actually, why are you so interested? What is in that for you? Okay, so as a historian, I have to rethink the thoughts of the people that I communicate with. And the basic thing is that I started studying it as a student. I've never thought about conversion as such, because conversion to me doesn't mean anything at all unless you practice what you think you believe in. And I very much believe strongly that growing up in a Methodist house where we used to pray every morning and cite Bible quotations before we can go to sleep and all that kind of stuff, I have enough of everything, and that I'm trying to focus on the essence, of that. My aunt, my cousin Kwame's mom, pointed us to a particular Bible's epistles, one of the letters. It said, whatever is good, whatever is right, whatever is of good report, that's what you think about. And I think that when I do my research, that's what I want to do.
So what is the Islam version of this?
Well, the Islamic, our Fatiha, the first verse of the Quran, actually talks about the need to stay on the right path. Okay? So the right path to me is consistently has the same values across the religions.
Having studied Islam for generations, for decades, and being a Christian, are there any signals you gather that should make us sit well in terms of confrontation, in terms of misunderstanding that could erupt into something unpleasant?
Yeah, Ghana, we have been very fortunate. Certainly there are Christians in Nigeria, and there are Christians even in Senegal. There's a small percentage of Christians. Senegal and Ghana, we don't have Muslim-Christian conflicts. The research that we did, occasionally you have preachers on the street who think that they know the Quran, very much fired up, and then they make statements that the religious forums have to address, okay? That is not what we are looking for. And also it was made aware to me that when there has been conflict within the Muslim societies, it is not with Christians normally, but within the faith itself. And those over time has been redressed, especially under the two major imams, the chief imam and the imam of the Ahl Sunnah group. They have worked very well towards that. I also interviewed extensively Dr. Wahab when he was alive for the Ahmadiyya movement, and you know that he was very well respected. I am not aware of this, but somebody told me about 2 weeks ago that the Ahl Sunnah imam actually embraced in public the Ahmadiyya imam. And if you really know the differences in theology and other kind of stuff, that is a big deal. It indicates that the leaderships of these particular religious movements or religious organizations seek peace. And when those leaderships seek peace, and that's one of the things that the Sunday Institute is trying to do, to encourage the public forum meetings of these leaders as often as possible, so that it is clear to the communities that our differences is not about faith at all, and that the common good, a point that Professor Sawyer used to talk, the common good is always more important than the sectarian concepts that societies try to stress. Yeah.
What about poverty and poverty reduction? I've been to Kano, and I've seen raw poverty in Kano, which will easily drive the youth to the Quranic schools. I think on the other side of it, the miracles that some of the so-called prophets of Christianity profess, and some of the prophecies they give, some of these border on poverty and economic development issues. The adherents in these two faiths have sometimes been victims of what they profess to be.
Poverty is a huge challenge. Economic development that actually is strategically thought about, and not political or politicians trying to use the disparities in the plight of citizens as a divide. Certainly, if you don't have sufficient development infrastructure, every time you try to build infrastructure in one region, it becomes a subject of debate, because you have not sustained what you have invested in previously. And so whenever a government comes and they want to develop here, some people are, because part of the reason is that we don't even know our country very well. So we don't know where strategic resources should be invested so that poverty can be reduced. I often think that when you build good roads that last, you open the country, and the poor people find their way on their farms to bring their commodities to center, and over time, they will improve themselves. Governments cannot improve the lives of anybody, but in health and infrastructure. That's what I strongly believe. So is there a role for churches and mosques in this particular development? I believe that they do. If you look the history of the church in the building of schools, it's very clear there. When we research on Islamic education, the Islamic education units that came in the mid-1980s, certainly there were resistance from those proprietors who have established their English-Arabic schools. But the engagement in this enterprise by the Muslim university-trained and teacher-training-trained individuals who became regional directors in the school system. I was telling a friend, actually I was telling John Azuma, that they are all in my footnotes, okay? So I talked to this person, I talked to that person. It would be interesting if somebody in a research, PhD or something like that, took the names to follow up on those individuals to see where they are, because they are the brains that actually sustained the Islamic education units. The girls that were in those schools, the teachers who encourage and talk to the mothers that sending your girl to school and not marrying her at the age of 13 or 15 is better long term than investing your money in buying big, beautiful colored things for a wedding. That doesn't last. And therefore, if the kid got an education, they can buy those things for themselves 10 years from now, and they didn't have to. And when they're married, they're going to marry somebody who is capable of adding value to their own children's children. So these are the kind of conversations that mosques and churches certainly should be engaged in. And the researchers should be encouraging that. I would like to see a research that looks at the girls who went to the Islamic education schools when it started in the mid-1980s to see how well they have succeeded and where their own children are. And I think that that kind of demographic kind of research work would be an interesting one on poverty and issues like that, yeah.
Well, you've written about some of these institutions and also personalities that define these institutions in the historical dictionary of Ghana, which is very popular. And how did this book come about? Because it's not really about Ghana that we have a historical dictionary. It's a series cutting across parts of the continent. What was the evolution of the series itself?
Well, the series was started by Scarecrow Press. And they publish not only Ghana, it's a global kind of, there's historical dictionaries of Ghana, of the Cote d'Ivoire, of Chad, of Burkina Faso. The person who did the first edition is the same person who attracted me to James Madison University, Professor Dan McFarlane. And even though he was not an Africanist, he did the one for Ghana, the one for Burkina Faso, Upper Volta at that time, and the one for the Ivory Coast. And so when I came in, he actually brought me so that he can retire. So he just lumped the research to me. He said, that's for you to do this one. And then Scarecrow wanted me to do the other ones, and I said, no. I have other research that I'm interested in. The thing that surprised me was the incredible research that he did to do the first edition, which was, I think, 1985 or something like that. So I took his research, and it took me about 5 years, actually, to be able to come to a point where, so when it got published, I think it published in 1995 or so. So you see the first one he did. So the second one, my name and his appeared together because part of his material has been used. And then it took me another 10 years to do the third edition, which came, I think, 2004 or 5, I'm not sure. And then the fourth edition came 2014. And I told them I'm not going to do it again. Because how do you do a historical dictionary? I'm proud to say that one reviewer said that it wasn't a dictionary, it was an encyclopedia. Because dictionaries sometimes give you quick definitions, and I wanted to write in such a way that it becomes almost a bridge article so that you can actually get more. So it has a very long chronological first part. I like the chronology, and I like the bibliography on the end. Because the chronology, if you pay attention, you can really see what is happening within the country. And political science, people like to predict. So a lot of political scientists and diplomats use this work here because they pay attention to those things. And then you also have to read not only the newspapers and things like that. These days, the newspapers are not. They give too much comments, but you can actually look in terms of and make out what the issues are. So you can do a quick synopsis in terms of the chronology that's happening. But you have to read journals. You have to read books. You have to read articles that are coming. You have to know where to find them. And this is a complaint that I am currently a external reader for geography, for history and religion, MPhil, and even I've done 1 or 2, I think 3 faculty promotions for the University of Ghana as a blind external reader. And I pay attention to the bibliographies to see how many African scholars are being used and as to whether those sources are available to the students. So you're talking about my class, I'll come back, I'll answer your question. I tell my students there's Africa, B-I-B, Africa, one word, and it will immediately pop out, and it will give you a map of Africa, all the maps and colors. You can click on them when you are doing a search of sources, and it can pop for you a lot of African scholars who have done the work. And that's part of that I'm trying to get into the dictionary, so that those who are reading it can actually see alternative sources and writings by scholars on the continent. And in terms of Ghana, the issues that I have found that astounds me is that Ghana is very good in writing and accepting United Nations recommendations, best practices and all that. We never implement them. We sign them, but we never implement them. And so that's one of the things that actually has fascinated me about how intellectually our communities are, how brilliant that they all do with United Nations appointments and all that, and they cannot really, once they get into politics, it becomes very difficult for us to get the outcomes. And when I talk about South Korea, about the state-led models, the state is actually using the research institutes in policy in a way that is actually sustainable. So that's my beef.
The bibliography is very impressive of the historical dictionary. But what has been the challenge in terms of usage, in terms of serving as a public policy document? Because there are institutions, you've looked at personalities, colonial, post-colonial, who have in diverse ways contributed to where we are, for good or evil. And there should be some challenges when you talk of policy, when you talk of Ghanaians being interested in multilateral publication other than their own, because this is wealthy data that you have in this book. Have you had inquiries, people making inquiries as to maybe they found this interesting enough as a policy aside?
Not really. I think because of my work on Islam, okay? When you and Ambassador Alan Martin were in Washington, I got called to the embassy, and Brigadier Ochre, I believe, I got called to the embassy for conversations. Alan was interested in trying to get the dossier and CVs of Ghanaian scholars overseas so that they can become available to institutions and organizations back home. He did that. To the point that I actually found it interesting when I was president of the Ghana Studies Association, when we had a meeting in DC on 2 occasions, we were able to get the embassy to host us. So Alan did one, and Ohene Ajikum also did one for us. And I thought that it was welcoming for scholars of Ghana to have access to the embassy. COVID came, since we can always point to COVID as a challenge. COVID came, and my students, when you want to get a visa to come, it has to be done virtually. And I'm very glad that they have done it virtually. It works. But when you have a student whose visa is stuck somewhere, and it's not a perfect system, you cannot, there's nobody that you can talk to. Okay? So you call, the good thing is can actually pick the phone and call somebody who could be a liaison at the embassy and get some of these things resolved. So that is another concern I have. In terms of policy, you sent me to North Dakota, okay? And the North Dakota thing was a US policy, President Bush, who was trying to facilitate and sustain democracy on the continent. So if you look at and try to open the US market gradually as a support for democratic governments. That was really, I was still there, but the Millennium Challenge, when it came, had different expectations, whereby the governments themselves identify a project that can contribute to democracy, and by the time you get home, you are absolutely exhausted. If you're a military man, you're sitting in the traffic thinking, this government must go. No, especially if it is in Niger. No. So you do the N1, it opens traffic. You can always justify some of these developments. I know Mozambique and other areas that did compact and talked about borehole water sources in villages that they say will contribute to democracy because it will put more girls at school instead of going walking distances too. So, yeah. And then we did another compact for electricity, and that became a little bit complicated. So these are the things that policy comes in. So somebody who wants to develop policy on Africa, I know for sure that a number of embassies actually have this dictionary. So when they read it, they can actually follow the history of what had happened in the given country, and they may be confident sufficiently to try us here and there. I don't know, the 5th edition is already going to be out, it's in press, but it will be very interesting what the 6th edition may have in terms of developments and party politics and stuff on Ghana. Yeah.
Yes, this means you're winding up with your academic life in the U.S.
Did I tell you that?
Yeah, you told me. I remember you said something to the effect that you will soon be handing over the Ghana Studies program to somebody else after 20-something years, and that you'll be looking forward to doing other things, visiting home more often than was the case, which also then brings back to the initial question of when do you return after so many years abroad?
Well, let me take this issue very directly, because I have never announced that I'm retiring. But what I'm thinking about, honestly, is that ever since we started the Ghana Summer Program, I've always wanted other faculty members to participate. Thanks to Awuku here and Prof here, we have developed a program that we have structured it in such a way that I don't have to be in Ghana for it to be effective. The travel part is organized through Crystal Tours. The academic part is organized through the Language Center. We have had only 2 hotels that we have dealt with in 27 years. Mr. Amwakohine's hotel, I have no relationship to him whatsoever. I stayed in about 3 or 4 hotels on the recommendation of friends and colleagues at the university, and that's the one I've found to be situated in a safe, reasonable price area that I think my students will be safe. The man never changed the price he charged us in 1979, never, except that he raised the meals charge by $5 for the first 20 years. And when he knew that he was going to sell his hotel, he negotiated another place for us, and they charged the same price. Okay? So I feel like if you have a deal like this, and we have it segmented in such a place, in a way that it works, I have brought and encouraged my faculty members that I work with. I was counting the other day, I have about 11 individuals who have come through the program. So when I say that I want to section it off, what I'm looking forward is not somebody who will come for a year or 2 and we say that it's too much work. I want somebody who can actually buy into it. Prof. Nkuno has been fantastic from day 1 when we started the program. Has been a partner who is here, knows the system. So any colleague who comes when I'm not here, Prof is here to be partner. So there are certain ingredients in the program. Yeah, certain ingredients in the program that actually sustains it, because we have seen so many programs that come at best 5 years and then they are gone and they don't come again for quite a long time. So what I'm trying to do when I made that point is that I don't want this program to be dependent and sustained only by my presence. So I want other people to become engaged in that. So that's what I'm doing.
Okay. Well, retirement or not, you've been a good ambassador of this country wherever you've been to, and it's a pleasure talking to you this evening. So, Mr. MC, if you want to continue the rest of the program.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the talk. Like, there are any questions? I'm sure there are many questions we'd like to ask our esteemed guests. And so if there are any questions, would take...
Roads. For a moment, I was like, this is a serious joke. And then you mentioned water aid and girls and democracy. And I'm like, wow, I've been educated. Democracy is not just balloting, but it means so many things. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Behind me, there's a camera, so I have to be cautious for those at home.
And I'll add to it, Madam. I was fortunate to teach a course this past spring semester. And normally when I do Modern Africa course, it's a upper level 400 course. You know, for a historian, what you're doing is doing the post Cold War period, the start of the Cold War and then the independence, and so you do historical developments and things like that. And that's why I like your book on the World Bank and things like that. And that's why I like your book on the World Bank. Because for once, somebody's looking at the governance of the World Bank, of the Bank of Ghana, looking at their policies where they differed from their ministers of finances, and then where they differed from the government concept of development and how to fund all these things. And when we teach those courses, we don't analyze government policies and development on the basis of ideas that have been articulated, either opposing World Bank standards for giving loans, or looking at the arguments that have been presented, especially political science area, look at the arguments that the bank has given for the ineffectiveness of African government, okay? So what I did for the first time doing this course again was to look at the development ideas that are there. So instead of doing the historical narratives, I decided to look at the history of the arguments that have been presented for development. And a colleague of mine, Dr. Michael Gupsa, who actually won the Guggenheim last year, is also looking at the ahistoricist nature of development, where the bank itself, this time the World Bank and the IMF, do not look at the histories of their own policies. So Michael Gupsa have done that. Our colleagues, Professor Emmanuel Champong, has a book that is coming out this September, where he's looking at the development ideas of a certain select first presidents on the continent of Africa, and trying to look also at what actually motivated and inspired their development ideas, and where they may have come into conflict with the banks. I pointed to, was it J.H. Mensah, who was finance minister, okay? And the idea is that, okay, you guys are taking loans and all that, and the bank says, well, you have to use the money for development, and so, oh, we didn't. So the bank will say, if you don't want to use it this way, then you may not going to get it, okay? And Kwame Nkrumah wants development. And Kwame Nkrumah made the argument that, yes, I want development and I want to use the money in the right way, but remember that what the bank may refer to as non-economic investment, for me it's important because I have a constituency that voted me to power. So you have the tensions that are in the policy that we talked about. Certainly citizens don't hear all these things, but in the classrooms, I believe that we have to actually engage these particular kind of conversations for our students who are going to be journalists and other kind of stuff, really to be familiar with someone. So when they are asking fire chat or President's monthly Meet the Press, they can really ask the right kind of questions that are appropriate. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to first of all say thank you to the Institute for making it possible for us to have this discussion. Coming from the education sector, I'm aware that there are a lot and lots of Ghanaian academics and others who have done a lot of good work and published some of these works outside that are not readily available to the, let me use the cliche, ordinary student, ordinary person on the street. My special relationship with you over the years made me aware of this book that you've done, and also the Islamic charismatic
Traditions.
whose topic I hardly ever remember. And I know there are people here who want to. The question that I would like to ask, and maybe not the question, but a suggestion, what efforts do you make, not you as an individual, do you make to ensure that some of these very good books, very well-researched works that you have abroad are available either with local publishers or whatever, so that we can also benefit from them? Otherwise, yes, they are fine books, but they are not available to the ordinary student or even lecturer here. How do we solve that? Now, my second question. In your earlier discussion about what impact the summer abroad programs have had on your students from a completely different kind of environment. And normally it is only about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, at most 4 weeks. What impact have they actually had? Thank you.
Okay. I'll take the first question first. With regards to the books, excuse me. I think that, in our careers, the first and most important thing for publishing, especially for young faculty members, is to get it published in recognized and respected publishers, because that is what you need to get tenure, okay, and promotions. We know that a number of journals are coming and they will accept and publish, but you are not making the decision in terms of your tenure and promotion. Your colleagues who have been in the field longer than you are know which journals are respected, and therefore you can publish as much as you want. If it's not in respected journals, they're going to not give you the pass. So that's different. The publishing part, a number of the university presses really has a lot of influence in terms of respectability. But when you get to, let's say, my age, and in terms of what and where I want to publish, and the subject matter that I'm publishing on, I want a publisher whose prices are within the range of the community that I think I have in mind when I wrote the book. So the book on Islamic education, it took us 10 years to research it. We wrote it maintaining the stories of the individuals who were engaged in it for years. And I looked at other publishers when we were trying to shop around, and I looked at their book prices, and I knew that So I chose Africa World Press. And the book price is around $25 to $35. I would say that is within range. It's not too expensive even for students. I mean, for Ghanaian students, it may be expensive, but the bookstores, the libraries have to make effort. When I did a 3rd edition of the Historical Dictionary, actually I carried copies home to give them away, and I left one at the BAM Library so that there will be a copy here. I saw several copies of the 4th edition at the bookstore once at Legon, and the next time I went, they were all gone. I don't know how much they were charging them for, but if you were buying it as a university library in America, it's not cheap. I was looking for a copy of the Islamic Talismanic Tradition, which is a 1991 publication. And there is a guy from the Netherlands who is researching here. He said that research inspired him to do a certain topic, but he cannot find the book. And I said, oh, you can go to Amazon.com, and he said, yeah, I did, but it's $400 and something. And I said, what? You know, so these are expensive books. Even when it was, I did the work with Edwin Mellon Press at that time, which was good press at that time. I have heard things about what some of my colleagues think of it now. But they were the folks who were interested in publishing the documents, the original documents, in addition to the translations, in the way that I wanted it. So they did it. The first copies were like $80 or $120 a copy. And you don't even get royalties in the proper way in that. So it's not anyone publishing to make money. The idea is publishing to further knowledge. So that is there. And now that, I think one way also is inter-university associations, whereby an American university and an African university can have a certain partnership in such a way that there can be access online to libraries. You know, so if those things become available to universities, I think that they should take advantage of that. With regards to the impact on summer program on our students, one of the areas I observed radical change in my students was when we started managing to get a number of African American students come to Ghana. It really, really impacted them positively in a way that some of the perceptions about Africa became very much mitigated. Certainly, we are a developing society. We have incredible education system. And when they have seen kids walking distances going to school and coming, we talk in the bus as we travel, and they are shocked. Because there was one particular student that I always use as an indicator of impact. And he has been at our university for, I think, about 5 years. Had not finished. He was going into his 6th year, and we brought him here for summer abroad. Dr. King, my colleague, has helped us develop a small scholarship that can actually make it possible for students to come. And Dr. King told me that we were at Akosombo. He came for breakfast in the morning, and he saw that guy sitting at the corner crying. And so he chatted with him, and the young man says, no, he feels very sorry for himself that he has had all these opportunities and have not made anything of that. Because he'd been watching and reflecting. I didn't even know that. I never saw him do that, but Dr. King told me. We went back. The next semester, he graduated. And I know, I have also been told that he became a teacher. Yeah, so the impact is there. You have the students who build affinity for the country. Whenever we play international soccer, I get texts coming from former students, telling me that they watch the game and things of that nature, you know. So they follow us. They follow the country. They have affinity for the country. I have one student several years ago who sent me an email that I sent to Dr. Amaka at Winneba. She works for a medical equipment distribution company. And she says, oh, we have a number of things that we want to get rid of. I was thinking if we can get it to Ghana. Okay, so these are some of the things that Ghana stays with them. And it is important, even though we don't hear from them all the time, it's important that Ghana has become part of the university experience. So a simple, long answer to your very straightforward question. Thank you. I thought that, okay.
Thank you so much, Prof, for your amazing conversation. So one of the things that I'm interested in, you mentioned earlier that South Korea has created incentives for its citizens who are abroad to come back. And then yesterday I was having a conversation with a couple of colleagues at the University of Ghana in the history department, and they made mention that right now there's about 6 or maybe 5 or 6 professors left because everybody's leaving. So in your opinion, what do you think the state can also do to create a more tangible incentive for scholars to return or have a longer relationship like you have had with different universities in the country? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Now you want me to think. Yes, I think that the institutions and programs and institutes, if you're going to wait for the state to do those things, it's not going to work. South Korea intentionally was looking at industrialization and certain research and development areas that actually targeted, and South Korea President Park, actually that was his initiative and he followed through with it. But I think that if you look to Ghana, you want to be very reasonable and pragmatic, I think that it is the academic institutions that should actually make that particular decisions. Reaching out for partnerships, do the research, because certainly you're not going to get MIT or Harvard saying that they're trying to do exchanges with their faculty. No. You have to look at certain programs that have innovative approaches to the kind of thing that you want, that will actually attract a faculty person, be them Ghanaian or others, who might want to spend a semester or a summer program. So, you know, if one wants to do, let's say, a graduate program in history or the humanities, and you want research methods as something that you are lacking for your students because you don't have a faculty to do that, we have the Ghana Studies Association that we are all members of. We can actually advertise there that the university is trying to put forth a summer program. We want faculty members who can make it to Ghana for May to June to do this particular leader seminar. And I'm sure that faculty members can write proposals to academic departments and get support for travel to do that, or a college dean might actually support an idea like that. Anyway, I'm not going to, there's information that has not really been discussed fully, so I wouldn't put it here. But there are schools that actually invite collaboration, and sometimes it works, sometimes it may fail initially, but if you continue that, it may morph into a different idea that is still usable.
Thank you very much. Prof, I have a question and a suggestion. The question is, in your view, what do you think has contributed to the relatively peaceful relationship between Christians and Muslims in Ghana? And how do we sustain this? That's the question. Then the suggestion is on the brain drain issue. My suggestion is that either the universities and institutions should make it a point to, and so on. People who went to study abroad were in a hurry to come back to Ghana to come and show what they have learned. And the government and institutions made it easy for them because they could come, clear their vehicle, have a place to stay, and so on. Now, we're talking about two things. One, there are a lot of, having lived in the States a little bit myself, I know there are a lot of people who are interested in coming home. At certain little, he figures, why should I go through this hassle? Okay? Nobody's chasing me. I stay. But if we had an intentional plan where we would waive some of these things for some of these people, put them under contract for 2 years minimum, but most of them would love to come and stay. They have a place to stay a little bit. They want to come and teach and impact some of the knowledge they've earned. The second part of this same thing is an intentional export of some of our skilled labor. For example, America is now paying a premium on nurses. We have nurses from 3 years ago who have not been placed. That is from the government system. Forget about the private schools who are producing nurses. America is paying a premium. Why can't we set XYZ criteria? We will help you migrate officially. You go, you pay some amount to government just, which will be used to train and place the people who are finishing school. After 5 years, you can come back. You have free if you promise this undertaking, we'll let you go, get a place for you, and come back. If we would go through something like this, Philippines has done it, other countries have done it. If we would go through something like this, maybe, just maybe, the diaspora situation would be improved and skilled labor can be brought back in a better way to benefit the country and the economy. Thank you.
Okay. The first one, interfaith relations. And I go back to the Asante-Muslim relations. And even when we did the interviews at Tanoboase, we went to the shrine. I have talked to a lot of shrine people. I've talked to a lot of important shrines. And then we talked to the imams, and then, of course, the work got there. I had an interesting conversation with the chief in Tanoboase. And I asked him, if he goes to church. He said, oh, yeah, he goes to church. And he said that the shrine itself, he is supposed to be the chief priest of the shrine. But he's also the leader of the community, so they have a priest who actually maintains the shrine. And you can do the same thing at Antwa. Antwa also has a priest, and then the Ohene and the elders also manage the affairs of the shrine. And so I said to the chief at Tanoboase, so you go to church, and you're a Christian, and you manage the shrine. So what if the priest actually advises you that you should step aside of this? And he said to me, look, the shrine was here before the church came. And he said, if there were no shrine, there would not be any town. And if there's no town, there will be no any church. So there's a good relationship between the community and the religions. And I've always felt in my comparative religious studies and a little bit of sociology, and a paper I did when I was in Israel, Asante Responses to Islam. Those particular responses, our cosmology is very, very inclusive. And our society is very, very embracing. And I think that that is one of the parts that Ghana has not lost touch with because of chieftaincy and the role that the traditional societies have played. So Emmanuel interviewed Reverend Akwesi Sapong, and he told the story of his father and father's brothers. And he said there was one that they called Paul Armantem, Paul who did not come early, but he is more than those who went early. And who was he? He was the one who attended the shrine at the house. And one was a Catholic and one was another thing, and he said they all flipped at a certain point. And then later on, the shrine attendant became a Christian, and he was a fanatic Christian. And then the others have actually taken other shrine responsibilities within the house. So it makes sense for Reverend Bishop Sapon really to talk about the church and the culture and the inclusion nature. And he said our house, that is his house, always had Muslims. And when the Muslims had Ramadan, they participated, and when they have different things, they all participated. And they all go to everybody's funeral. So the thing that actually Ghana has maintained, that actually has helped us, is the culture. And I think that to discuss Christianity and Islam without the culture within which they implemented their faith would be meaningless. With regards to government policies, I think, I jotted for myself the number of diaspora that came back and have made impact. CDD is a return kind of idea. Balfour and Prof and Prempeh, they all work in the US and came back. Ashesi is a return concept. So the area that I believe can address some of the issues that you have raised actually are the private universities. I think that the private universities have a lot of space to be innovative and therefore work in that particular mode. Even the issue that Bright you mentioned, summer programs, summer classes, summer courses that are very relevant to them where they don't have the specialization sufficient to address a large number of students can always be partnered in a way. And we have one thing that COVID actually did that is positive is that we all got into virtual engagement. So the virtual nature of classes also is very well. And Prof has a former student who was writing the master's and couldn't find some of those particular resources, journals. Reach out to me and I download some journals that actually help her to do her research. So the kind of networks that we have are always very, very useful. And as I mentioned, when you're reading MPhil dissertations and stuff like that as a foreign faculty member overseas, but also working with colleagues in Ghana, that's another thing that we can actually develop. And if that works well, then your university can actually take a look at Fulbright and other opportunities where people can actually come, because our universities also are very interested in Fulbrights because it doesn't cost us much to host you because Fulbright is already covering some of those particular expenses. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. Shall we hear it again for Prof? Give Prof a round of applause. We are very, very, very grateful. Thank you for gracing this occasion. Thank you, Mr. Ajimandria, for also being the moderator for this event. We have learned a lot from you. It's quite interesting that the International Office for Migration is opposite. And we are I think they should have even been here to pick one or two things. We are very grateful. Thank you all once again for honoring us with your presence. Let's welcome Koko for a few announcements.
Thank you. Thank you very much once again. My name is Kwesivia Achia. At the Institute, I'm usually called Miss K. So I prefer Miss K. Thank you, and I would like to say, GHIA, we are very interested in harnessing knowledge, developing people, and storing knowledge for future use. So this is going to be on our YouTube page. You can always go back, refer, and also share. And we have platforms like this. We are supposed to be doing it usually every month or quarterly, but this involves a lot of resources. So we are appealing to you, if it touches your heart, if you want to be kind to us, do something really nice. If you haven't done anything at all this first quarter, please, yes, we are entering the second quarter. Please, you can always donate. You can make contributions. You can see me, and you make contributions for our programs. Not only in cash, but in kind. If you have projects, if you have researches, if you have anything you want us to help you with, we are there. We have a network of qualified professionals, individuals who can help you with a lot of things, especially with international relations and diplomatic issues. So contact GHIIA, Institute of International Affairs, Ghana, and we'll be very glad to work with you. Does that sound nice? Thank you very much. And the last one is membership will be opened again in October. So membership with the Institute. So we take in member applications in October. December, we inaugurate the new members for the new year. So please watch out. Circulars will be going around again on our social media pages, especially on LinkedIn. So once we open applications for membership, for subscription, yes, subscription, please, we invite you all to make an application to subscribe to our membership opportunities. All right. Thank you very much. And on behalf of management, I'm one of the directors of the Institute. So on behalf of my senior directors and team, we thank you so much. And we hope the next one you would come again. Thank you. Refreshments outside so we can interact, get to know somebody, and pictures as well, please. Prof, we'll take pictures here, please. So we'll just, yes. Oh, I don't know whether you saw this, please. Just a minute. This is the book. This, this is the So this is the Historical Dictionary of Ghana. This is the book. This is the 4th edition, and we are waiting the 5th one.
The 5th edition should be with me and Professor Edmond Abeka.
I mean, to do a project as well. Probably come with a historical diplomatic dictionary of the